I'm Kimberly Winters, podcaster. I went vegan in 2015. What got me there, I think, all of these little things that showed up in my life from the time I was a child. I remember seeing an ad in a magazine. I don't remember the magazine, but the ad itself was from an animal rights organization. It was a photo of a calf in a box. And around the box, it said, he only has 3 feet. And as I read it, they were talking about this calf that was being raised to be made into veal. I tore it out of the magazine and I hung it up on the back of my bedroom door. I never ate veal. I was probably 8 or 9 at the time. My dad would occasionally want to have veal, and my mom tried to feed it to me once, and I wouldn't eat it because I'd seen this ad in this magazine. But I continued to eat other animals that I was used to. I hadn't made that connection. Then I'm going through high school, and my friends and I are going to all of the Bath and Body Works type places, and we're buying all of our perfumes. And I realized that some perfumes that you buy say not tested on animals. Others say finished product not tested on animals. And some don't say anything at all. So I started to kind of question that, and decided at that point I was only going to buy products that hadn't been tested on animals. But I was still eating them. I got to college, I took a class in ethics, and started to hear more about animal testing. And at this point I was like, I'm never buying anything that's been tested on animals. But still hadn't made the connection until another magazine showed up. And that was in 2001. I got in the mail an issue of PETA's Animal Times. I have no idea why it showed up in my mailbox. It was addressed to me, but I don't remember ever filling anything out. I read the magazine cover to cover, and I was vegetarian overnight. It did take me 14 years, though, to finally make the final switch to be vegan. I was on and off. I'd stop eating cheese for a while. But when I first decided to go vegetarian, the only thing that really kept me from calling myself vegan was eating cheese and eggs, because I had gotten rid of all leather shoes, any handbags I had. Everything else in my life was in alignment with being vegan, except for those 2 things. I still hadn't made the connection to the cruelty in those 2 industries.
What made you go vegan, though?
I think I always knew that that was the goal. And I made a lot of excuses, kind of fell into habits. I was in my 20s and dating and was already having a hard time with people saying, oh, it's so difficult with you being vegetarian. And one person even dumped me because I didn't want to share his pork chops with him. So I kind of made maybe it's not that bad. It's okay that I'm not vegan yet. And I kind of held on to that. And then I went vegan for a while, and then I would eat pizza, and then we know how addictive cheese can be, and then would kind of make an excuse. And it's okay, I'm gonna just keep eating cheese and I'll get back to being vegan. And then I kept reading all the books, I kept watching the documentaries, and there wasn't any one thing. It really was all of these seeds that had been planted throughout my life. And finally, one moment, I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I've been vegan ever since.
Wow. So you weren't worried that you might need animal protein from something?
Not at all. Not at all. It really was, unfortunately, just convenience, being used to it, being able to eat pizza and easy stuff like that. I never was really concerned from the health perspective. I went vegetarian because I felt it was wrong to eat animals. And then it just kind of built from there. And then I didn't want to consume their byproducts either.
It sounds like you did this all entirely for ethics, but dairy is easy. It's easy to think there's nothing unethical about that, right? Did something help you realize that it's not actually ethical?
I think that it was one of those things where I knew and hadn't accepted yet, because I had seen documentaries that showed the mother cows bellowing and just desperate for their babies to be returned to them. I had seen chickens and, with the eggs like coming out of them but stuck because they have a prolapse because they've been bred and they're laying so many eggs and it's beyond what their bodies are capable of. But I still loved cake and was going to eat cake and if there wasn't a vegan option, then I had cake that had eggs and dairy in it. Looking back, like we all say, every vegan I've ever met always says, the only regret I have is that I didn't do it sooner. And that is 100%. I wish that night when I decided that I was going vegetarian in 2001, I wish I had just gone vegan. At the time, I didn't know how to cook either. And I hated vegetables. My family, I was almost 21, and I was a couple months before my 21st birthday, and my parents were like, this is not going to stick. It was my brother, who's never been interested in vegetarianism or veganism. He's a vegetable person. And they were like, your brother eats more vegetables than you. You're never going to do this. And, here we are, 20 plus years later. And I've learned how to cook. I love vegetables. But yeah, it was.
So you've learned to acquire a taste for vegetables, and you've learned that, even if you don't like something now, you could potentially like it later.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that my story kind of helps people who are thinking about, I hate vegetables. I don't know what to do with them. What do you even eat? Or I have no idea how to cook. How can you possibly be vegan if you don't know how to cook? And you can, and yeah, you can learn how to like things. We think about foods we hated as children, like Brussels sprouts, old people food. Ugh. I love them now. Yeah. And the difference is, that they haven't been boiled until they're a weird olive green. They're lightly roasted and they're like, salt and pepper. They have some flavor to them. You don't need to make things complicated to make them enjoyable.
Yeah, you're making me think of Dr. Greger when he says all taste is acquired except for human breast milk.
Yeah, I like that.
It's interesting that this all began with this whole veal thing.
Yeah.
But you went vegetarian first, and veal is a byproduct essentially of dairy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a connection I did not make right away. And I think that when we look at the animal agriculture industry, they can be really good at hiding a lot of the information that we really need to know in order to make informed decisions about what we're eating, who we're eating.
So after you went vegan, did you notice any changes physiologically, mentally, or emotionally?
Yes. So going vegan put me in alignment with who I am, with what my values are. And my goodness, if that doesn't give you a full self-esteem boost and just belief in yourself and the ability to be able to do what you want to do, because now things are really, you're living in your truth. And I don't know if there's anything that feels better than that.
So that's interesting. How might you describe that a little more? What is it like to live in your truth? What does that mean? So
I think my whole life, it's been important to me to be kind, to be compassionate. And I've always loved animals, felt connected to the earth, to nature, to the animals with whom I shared a home growing up, and those I meet on the street or in someone else's home. I feel an instant connection. And there had kind of always been a disconnect when I think back of how I felt just kind of out of sorts and I didn't fit in anywhere. And as I started to learn about vegetarianism, I felt more at home. And then going vegan, it was almost like, it was instant, where it was like, oh, this is who I am. And it's what I'm meant to do and how I'm meant to show up in the world. Yeah.
So a lot of people go vegan for any number of reasons, from typically environment to health to ethics. Sometimes I'm curious how that might evolve over time. It sounds like you did this entirely for ethics, and I imagine that's always going to be the case and probably going to ground you forever in this. And therefore, you are a true vegan. So I'm wondering, the health and the environment now, is that something also that you're learning more about?
Yes, and I definitely care about those two things. But even if someone told me today that you could be the healthiest you've ever been and the planet will be fine if you ate animals, I still wouldn't do it because it's so ingrained in me that I don't ever want to be the cause of that level of suffering for anyone. And to know what's going on in the world and the way that humans treat other than human animals, I just could never be part of that. But now as I get older and you start to think about your health a little bit more and the issues with the environment are so glaring, people do ignore them as people do, right? But you really can't. It's so obvious the destruction that we're doing to the planet and yeah, your health, you've got to be concerned about it. As you start to get older, you start to feel less invincible than you do in your teens and your 20s. And so I do think more about how can I be more healthful? It used to just be like, I don't care what I'm eating. It's good if it's considered junk food. It's vegan. I'm all right with that. But now I do think a little bit more. I eat food I've made at home more than takeout. And I am, mindful of being more healthful that way.
What's a day of eating look like?
So yeah, lately it's every morning is like a nice bowl of oatmeal, and it's either sometimes we'll make it in the rice cooker, and other times I like overnight oats. Depends on if I'm in a hot or cold mood, but it's always got some nuts on it, some dried fruit, maybe a little drizzle of some really good maple syrup, and yeah, that's how I start my day. And it's really good because I used to eat things that either, I'd happily have like a slice of cake for breakfast or leftovers from dinner. And if it was really heavy, it kind of started off my day where I didn't feel so great. But now with the oatmeal, that kind of really like wakes me up. I don't feel super sluggish, and it's a really solid start to the day. Lunch can be anything from leftovers from dinner to, like today, for example, was just rice with some beans and salsa. We need to get some more greens in the house today. But sometimes we'll put kale or spinach in the bowls, and it's just really simple things. Dinner, maybe some like a tofu stir fry or like a tempeh sandwich. Yeah, anything that's just like loaded with vegetables now. And the occasional, like Morningstar nuggets or things like that when you're feeling like a little junky, I guess the word maybe. but yeah, really just focusing on getting as many fresh vegetables in me every day. Yeah.
I like to emphasize that there's a learning curve to this. People try to go vegan and then they claim they fail, right? And I'm like, well, what did you do? If you had that ethical underpinning, then you would have found a way to make it work. Even people I know that have been vegan for 50 plus years are still learning new things. I've been vegan since 2011. I'm still learning new things, and especially in the kitchen.
Oh yeah.
So what's the learning curve been like for you?
Well, since, when I started as a vegetarian and had no idea how to cook and no idea what to eat, it was a significant learning curve. But I think that just proves that it's possible for anybody to be able to make it to this point and be happy and comfortable with what they're doing and feel capable of doing it. But the learning curve, I think we're always learning. And that's definitely my personality anyway. I'm always finding something new that I want to learn about. I'm always like taking a course here and a class there, just because something interests me. So I'm always learning. But there's so much going on within all of the things that we're trying to avoid as vegans that there's always something to learn. Someone recently mentioned to me that cruise ships, like we can think about cruise ships, the destruction they might be doing to the ocean just based on the garbage they dump or that kind of stuff. But this person I was speaking to talked about just the sound of a cruise ship can be really disturbing to the creatures who are living under the water. And it can cause them to lose track of where they're going or end up beaching themselves. And so it was something that I hadn't even thought of, but once they said it, it made perfect sense. Like, oh yeah, of course, that would be really disruptive to the lives that they're living in the ocean. So there's always something to learn. There's always a new book to read. There's always a new documentary to watch. And for me, I think that's the amazing thing, is that we're never done learning about how we can make the world better, how we can become better versions of ourselves, and how we can improve the lives of those who need us to help them.
Nice, yeah. Now, if somebody sat down in front of you and they were like, hey, I'm getting ready to, I would like to order some chicken. Is that okay with you? What would you say?
Well, now my approach is much more of like, why are you asking me if it's okay with me?
Good response. You're the first person who's actually got that right. It is a test, and you passed. You must be watching my videos.
When I was younger and smug, I would have said, what about the chicken? Don't you think the chicken minds? That would have been my approach.
Yeah.
But now it's much more of like, what is it that's making you ask me this question?
Wow,
there's some
impressive.
guilt there, or there's something under the surface that you're not touching on. Because I think people say that and they think that they're being kind to me. But it's about them.
Yeah, interesting. Good job. So, how often, how often do you cheat? Let a little dairy slip in or something.
Never. Because, and you're not the first person to ask that question, right? Because for so many people who they just eat this way, that way, they don't question it, and they've grown up, this is just what we eat. These animals are here for us to do this to, and that's just what we're supposed to be doing. They think that it's a diet. And they're like, well, nobody sticks to a diet forever. Like, you've got to enjoy things. And I do. When I'm in the mood for something really fun, I'm having a vegan slice of cake. I'm having vegan brownies or a vegan milkshake. I'm a real sweets person, in case you couldn't tell. But that idea that you would cheat on a moral philosophy that you're living by, it's just, I think that's the key. And whenever I talk to someone about veganism, when they ask me questions, why do you do this? What is it really? I always stress the difference between when someone tells you they're vegan and someone tells you they're plant-based. They're living different lives and they're motivated by different things. Yeah, they're eating very similar food, but it's not the same thing. And veganism has this philosophy behind it, and it's the way that you live your whole life. Veganism, it directs every decision that I make. And to me, that's so beautiful. Veganism is the most beautiful decision I've ever made, and it continues to guide my life and make my life better. And in turn, it's making lives of others better too.
Do you find this to be restrictive at all?
No.
Because, the reason why I'm asking is I've been learning about intuitive eating recently, and I've been coming across quite a few people who used to have eating disorders. And so I think it's important for people to understand that it isn't restrictive. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like you found that it's not restrictive, and I don't know if that even means anything to you. But, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. Quite a few, in fact. Before, when I was still consuming animals, I ate like 5 things. And I was never willing to really expand beyond cuisines I was already familiar with, and was uncomfortable with the idea of eating different kinds of animals than what I was used to. So I was very limited in what I would eat. Mm-hmm. And then I went vegetarian, and I started to discover all these different cuisines I'd never had before. I had had Indian food for the first time, or sushi, like veggie sushi for the first time. And I was like, oh my gosh, there are all these flavors and textures I've never even experienced before. And I had a binge eating disorder, and it was bad. And I would essentially black out and come to, and I'd be surrounded by half-empty containers of cookies and ice cream. And before I went vegetarian, and going vegetarian, actually, that it kind of stopped then. And now, having been vegan, I don't have that issue that way. If I'm binging, essentially, like I'm fully aware that, like, oh, I think maybe I ate too much tonight, but it's never this like mindless thing where I essentially black out. But as far as being restricted, I've never felt more able to try new things and not afraid to try new things, because it's just vegetables and grains and fruits, and there's like this whole world of like thousands of things that I still haven't tried, and that is incredible.
Since you went vegan, like what kind of new illnesses have you acquired?
None.
No new ailments, nothing?
No.
Hair is not falling out? Teeth?
No, my hair's not falling out. My teeth are great. My dentist is always very impressed. And in fact, going to the dentist is one of my favorite things, because it's the one time that someone tells me I'm perfect. So I will take that. But yeah, no new ailments. I feel better and better. Yeah, it's great.
And could you be with somebody who isn't vegan?
No. So that's an interesting thing, and it's one of those things that I think evolves, because when I was dating, I was more open to a person who wasn't vegan. Even vegetarian, because I was vegetarian at that point, I didn't feel like it was as important. But now, I could never be with someone who wasn't vegan.
Not even for a little bit?
No, not even for a little bit.
Now, are you seeing anybody now?
I'm married.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah.
And is he vegan?
He is.
Oh, cool.
Thanks to me.
Oh, wow, okay. So he wasn't when you met him, though?
He wasn't.
Okay, so you could be for a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess at that point, because I went vegan after about a year after we were married.
Oh, okay.
But I was vegetarian the whole time. He knew me, and we would have conversations. He would ask me all kinds of questions. He was always really open. And of course, he had said things like, that's great for you, that's not for me, or, he wasn't really interested in that being part of who he was when we first got together. And we even, going through like planning for the wedding, talking about what if we have kids one day, how do you feel about that? And he was open to them being vegetarian, but I think we had talked a few times and it was like, I don't know about raising kids vegan. But we don't have kids, so, but at this point now, if we did, they would be vegan. And I know that there'll be somebody who will think, well, you can't force that on your kids. But, everybody forces their lifestyle on their kids, no matter what you're doing. Kids whose parents are really active typically are really active. Kids of parents who are not very active, they're not that active. And so it's not just your food that you're teaching them. It's everything. So strike that right now.
Nice. Yeah, good job. I'm glad you went there, because I'm really excited about putting more content out there in relation to raising children vegan. Because I've met so many lifelong vegans over the last few years. The one I've met that's the longest, 72 years old, Mark Huberman, and quite a few others that are 50, 47, in that age range. And I'm meeting more and more every time I get out, And my doctor's raising 3 children vegan from birth. I think I'm interviewing somebody potentially tomorrow who has 7 children that she's raised vegan from birth. So, you think we'll see a vegan world?
Yeah. And I think that because I want that so badly. So I think it'll happen. And I'm going to say that I'll see it in my lifetime, because that, why not? Why not go big? Let's dream big. And just, I know that it's not going to happen overnight. I know I've met people. I understand how things work, but we could do it.
And what do you think that would look like?
That would be amazing. It's just so much more kindness, and just the world would just be softer. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the things that we see happening right now wouldn't be happening. I think that the way that we treat one another and the way that we treat other species, and just the planet as a whole, there's a lot of darkness, and I think it's because of the way that so many people still choose to eat, and the sheer number almost requires that there's this cruelty involved in it. And if we can move away from that and we don't abuse other beings, I think we can stop abusing each other, stop abusing ourselves. And it would just, I think softer really is the word. Yeah.
You ever find yourself in a dark place with all this enlightenment that you have in such a non-vegan world?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's meeting people like you and, talking with my husband who...
I put you in a dark place?
No. Meeting people like you to remind me that the dark place, that's not the only place there is, It is very easy sometimes when you look around at what's still going on and you look at the suffering that humans inflict on animals for food, for beauty products, for drugs, and it can really feel overwhelming. But then you meet other vegans and you realize you're not alone. So you're not the only person in the world who's fighting against it. And even though we are still a small number, there are a lot of us. And we do it in all these different ways, and that, I think, is key. We're not all approaching this veganism in the same way. And all of us are activists, whether we identify that way or not. And the way that we show up shows other people that you can just be a normal person and make this huge, significant, beautiful change.
What have you found to be the most effective way at encouraging others to consider this?
Meeting them where they are. And as much as I wish I'd gone vegan when I went vegetarian, I think it makes it easier for others when they hear that story to be open to it. Because I had so many steps, I had so much to learn, and I did it. And there's so much more available now. There's an abundance of vegan options at restaurants, at the grocery store. There's a gazillion cookbooks out there now. There are people online with tons of free information. There's so many resources that from the very start, you don't have to search. I didn't meet another vegetarian, let alone vegan, for like the first 10 years. And I felt alone a lot of the time. And that, I think, is what makes it so much easier now, is that you can go from eating a standard American diet full of animal products to vegan pretty quickly, especially if you've got that ethical piece behind you, because it's just a matter of swapping things out at this point. And it's okay if you start out where everything is like the processed vegan food. If you're not a person with significant health issues where you need to be concerned about that, then I'd say if you love burgers, then you just start swapping out, for vegan burgers. And if your thing is, cheese, there are so many cheeses. I will say though, give yourself a break, like a couple weeks, because cheese is so addictive that to go from cheese from cows to vegan cheese, like you're not going to get that hit, that like dopamine hit that you get with cow cheese. Yeah.
Case of morphine rush.
Yes, that's it. Yep.
What do you think about like lab grown meat and maybe even like Beyond and all that kind of stuff?
So as far as like Beyond, it has its place. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really helpful when people are first transitioning, because it's so familiar. The texture, the way it smells, like, wow, that's really familiar. For me, it doesn't have like a permanent place in my life where it's like I regularly eat that. Because I really am finding, like as we talked about earlier, that I'm moving more towards more whole foods, because it feels better. lab-grown meat, it feels weird to me because I feel like we're still taking it from an animal. So even if it's a matter of, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, taking a needle and like withdrawing some cells. And so, the cow barely even notices because it's such a small needle and they're so big. So there isn't this obvious suffering in front of you. I mean, if they were using that to make cat food, I share my home with four cats, and it really is hard twice a day with the wet food, feeding them, knowing where this food has come from. But these cats, they chose us. They showed up on our back porch at various times in the last few years, the cat distribution system at work. And, we weren't going to just let them live out in the world where their lifespan goes from 16 plus to 3 if they're lucky. So we brought them in, and this is what we have to do right now. So I feel like if there were a way to create food for the cats that met their requirements, I'd be open to learning more about that. I still wonder, though, where does it start? And the animals from whom they might be extracting some cells or whatever, what is their life like? And is it, even if they're not suffering, it's still exploitation? And so from a vegan perspective, we're really getting deep into that, like the moral philosophy, the ethics behind it. If we're still exploiting them, I don't know, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and you mentioned your podcast earlier when you introduced yourself. Tell me what that's called and what's that about?
Sure. So the podcast is called Did You Bring the Hummus? It began as a Toastmasters project. I had never even listened to a podcast before, but it came up and it seemed like the most challenging of my options within the projects, within my pathway, they call it. And I decided, okay, let's give this a shot. So one of the requirements was that you had to record 60 minutes of content and put it out in the world for strangers to hear. So I thought, I better talk about something that really matters to me. So I chose to talk about veganism. Did You Bring the Hummus? The name came from the fact that hummus is such a standard vegan option, right? But there's a meme out there floating on the internet where there's dinosaurs sitting together having lunch at a table, and they're all T-Rexes, right? And then the brontosaurus, or whatever the actual term for a brontosaurus is, comes walking in, and you know that that's the vegan dinosaur, and the dinosaur and the brontosaurus is saying, I brought the hummus. I'm like, of course you did, because you were the vegan dinosaur. And so I thought, that's a really good play on this, so we're going to call it Did You Bring the Hummus? And I have one hard and fast rule, and that is that all of my guests have to be vegan.
Oh, cool.
Other than that, whatever we talk about is completely up to me and the guest. There are some episodes that are just me if there's something that is really weighing on my heart. There was an episode I did about the bird flamingo. He'd been a king pigeon in New York City that had been taken into the Wild Bird Fund. Someone had found him on the street. He was dyed pink, and they think it was from a gender reveal party. And he was brought in, and he was suffering from inhaling the dye that his body had been dipped in, and he did end up dying. They tried to save him, and he just couldn't recover from having inhaled the fumes from the hair dye. And so I did just a quick 15-minute episode on flamingo. He got his own episode. But most of my episodes are me interviewing a guest, and again, they are vegan. I've got two things I always talk about. We open every episode talking about that guest vegan journey, and we close every episode talking about hummus. And you might think, what is there to say about hummus? And if you listen to the podcast, there's plenty to say about hummus.
Yeah, I guess there's all kinds of varieties of hummus, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wow.
A lot of emotions around hummus, a lot of stories. Yeah.
I guess it's probably hard to do like a super healthy oil-free hummus. It's hard to find at the stores.
Yes, it's hard to find at the store,
Yeah.
but making it at home, traditional hummus actually isn't made with oil. Mm-hmm. It will, when you kind of do the fancy spoon thing to give you a little ditch in the middle, that's where you pour the olive oil into once it's already made. But as you're making it, traditionally, hummus does not have oil in it. And the trick to make it creamy, cold water.
Oh, wow. What's your favorite kind of hummus?
So boring. Plain tahini hummus.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And do you make your own?
I'm still working on perfecting that. But yeah, occasionally I do.
And how can we find this podcast?
It's everywhere. So you can, whatever your favorite podcast app is, just go and type in, "Did you bring the hummus?" It's also on my website, so pretty easy to find.
Now, I don't really do podcasts, so is that something I can easily find if that's something I don't do? Like, what would be the easiest way for me to access that?
So the easiest way would just be to go to my website. It's on the front page of my website. It updates with the latest episode right at the top, and you can just scroll down and find one that interests you.
And what's that website URL?
DidYouBringTheHummus.com.
That's so convenient.
It is. Glad I thought of it.
And that's .com.
Yes.
You have any quotes or last minute encouraging words or something like that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just want everyone to know that you can do this. That especially if you find that why, you get deep into why does veganism matter to me? And because when we have this idea of something that's bigger than ourselves, it's so much easier to do it and to keep doing it in those moments when it gets hard. When you think about from like a diet perspective, right? You have a goal that maybe, even if your goal around dieting could be, I want to be around for my kids, I want to run around with my grandkids. That is still very much about you. And it's very easy to go, I'll be fine. I can still eat this way and I can still play with the kids and it'll be okay. But when you have this idea that really changes the world, it's so much easier in those moments where maybe you go, oh, you know what, this is too much. I have too much to learn. I don't know what to eat. I don't know any vegans in my life and I don't know what to do next. You turn back to that philosophy, that the moral stance that you have, the ethics that you're holding on to, and you can stick with anything.
Yeah. Even making me think, there's been times, and I don't know if this is appropriate for me to say, but I've been like so ethically hardcore prior to knowing anything about health or anything about nutrition, not a drop. You know, and that was like for the first 5 years of me being vegan. But it was like, you know, I thought, you know, even if this kills me, I'll die with a smile on my face. Because I don't want, you know, the fact that every day I can go without eating animals is just a beautiful day to me, you know, like,
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, so, wow. Well, I wasn't expecting this to be so wonderful. I had no idea what I was getting into because I didn't know you. Usually I might know somebody a little bit. But yeah, you've nailed this, and I'm excited to check out your podcast, and you might make me have to subscribe to something, I think, even.
That is a possibility, and then you get updates right to your phone when there's a new episode.
Cool. Sounds like fun. Well, I appreciate your time, and
Thank you.
And love everything you're doing.
Thank you so much.